Welcome to Global Tax Talks. I'm Will Morris, and we're filming here at PwC's Africa Tax Policy and Business Symposium in Mombasa, Kenya, where I'm delighted to be joined by Esiri Agbeyi, who's a Nigerian partner who leads PwC's Africa Family Business Practice, as well as being a leading sustainability expert. Esiri, welcome.
Thank you, Will. We're glad to be here.
Great to have you here. Esiri, so let me ask you the first question. So we're going to talk about sustainability. So what are the major shifts we're seeing in Africa's sustainability and ESG reporting landscape? And how should business separate reality of current ESG pullback?
I think there is activity at the country level where we're seeing stronger political statements being made around net zero commitment. And then we're seeing that transcend into regulators now beginning to shape the landscape when it comes to laws and policies that should guide. But then we're also seeing the adoption of specific ESG frameworks, because what we've seen over time is there's been a lot of ESG frameworks that companies clear about this, aligned with. And that's, of course, disparity in terms of reporting. So what we're beginning to see is a lot more unification, such as the adoption of the IFRS standard.
Yep.
And some countries have actually phased those adoptions. So like Nigeria, and has set a date for mandatory reporting come, say, 2029.
Right.
But then phased voluntary adoption before that. We're also seeing countries like Zambia making such moves. We're seeing activity around carbon taxes as well.
Okay.
There's some countries coming up with carbon taxes like South Africa, trying to raise funds around the transition to sustainability. I think for leaders, more of the concern is around the investor push, but also consumer organization pressure, where a lot more civil society organizations are raising up concerns around either greenwashing.
Right.
And then you also see the fact that there's questions being had around how much capital can be raised and whether or not capital should be allocated to these companies where their value chains don't support sustainability.
Right. Okay. So let's move inside the corporation, if you will. So how can executives better understand the sustainability risks inside their organization and ensure that the reporting actually strengthens resilience and transparency?
Yeah, so much of that has been put on sustainability champions, who sometimes don't necessarily understand the full business strategy. But what needs to happen more is a full integration within the businesses. So it's seen more as a corporate agenda, a business agenda, and that should involve every single person from marketing to finance and all that. And I think that directly leads me to governance. What's the governance structure? What's the tone at the top? How's the board viewing it? A lot more board members need to be educated around ESG and just what it means for them when it comes to executing within the organization. Yep. So I think that connect between the boardroom and the executives and also the operational staff on ground is important, because it ties them back to reporting. Where the story is not told right, then you find more gaps and more backlash from society.
Okay, those are great points. So, Esiri, where do the business opportunities lie in sustainability, and how do those connect to corporate strategy and financial performance?
Okay, so I think the business opportunities will differ according to the industries. There's several opportunities coming from the oil and gas sector, where you'd have to ask the question around what's the phased transition going to be like to a greener economy.
Yeah.
And for Nigeria, as a case in point, we're looking more at gas transition. That requires a lot of investment in infrastructure. And to attract that kind of investment, you definitely want to think about incentives that can pull the right investors there. But you also want to ask questions around how these organizations interact with the society, whether or not, for instance, they have dedicated funds to ensuring that they clean up after any spillover, but they also create new livelihoods for those who have been put out of jobs because of their activity.
Right.
Second, may be around also thinking through who we lend to, for instance, for the banks, for consumer industries. What kind of packaging do we want to now use? Is it easier to recycle those? Do we have extended producer responsibility organization or mandates that we can use to make this softer? Do we need to educate a lot more people so we understand what it means and they can be part of that agenda as well? Those opportunities therefore mean that new products will emerge, and those new products will cater to a new side of the market, which is an added bonus for companies, where it then increases their bottom line.
Right.
And I think for the most part, if you can't make the connection back to where the money is and how you spend, it's going to be very difficult to onboard that in companies. So these opportunities definitely will drive that. And maybe the last point around incentives. Some of the incentives that we're seeing may be around, say, carbon market activations, how we treat carbon credits, what do we need to invest in to be able to offset some of those carbon emissions that we need, and what are the tax implications. So a lot of advocacy does need to happen to either educate regulators around these opportunities and then have companies embrace them.
Great. Those are really helpful answers. So, Esiri, one final question, and maybe this is a Northern Hemisphere obsession, but carbon taxes are often touted as the answer to pretty much every question. They obviously, sort of get people closer to net zero, but they also raise large amounts of money for the energy transition. But as you said a little earlier, emissions in Africa are very low. So are carbon taxes an answer to any question in Africa?
Yeah, I think they are in part. But then for Africa, there also needs to be a discussion around how we will fund the transition to net zero. Some of what we're seeing with the EU is also causing some reaction from African countries to think how our products are now still competitive when we export them to the EU. And so it means that Africa must also take...
So that's CBAM, for example.
Yeah, CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. If you're going to export to those countries and then still have to consider those carbon taxes, for those who are importing or exporting to Africa, there has to be also the consideration around whether or not Africa is now becoming a dumping ground. And so carbon taxes can be used as a tool to address that. Second is the fact that, yes, Africa doesn't emit as much, but we do see the effects in form of floods, droughts, and the climate change that we're experiencing. And there's also huge reliance on fossil fuels. That means that even if we had to move into greener economies, there has to be a phased transition, which should allow for more investment in those areas that we're looking to expand on. And for Nigeria, as an example, we're looking to transit into gas as a cleaner fuel. That requires a lot of investments in the pipelines or in the distribution systems that will be used for that. Incentives are a good way to have that conversation. So I think a combination of the taxes, but also the incentives would be a better approach, and also a better approach in terms of responding to what we're seeing internationally going on.
Great. Thank you so much. Esiri, it's been great having you here, and thank you for these really insightful answers.
Thank you so much for having me, Will.
You're very welcome. And thank you for joining us, and come back next time so that you stay global tax ready.